James Sherwood is an extraordinary man. He's a man of great vision. He's a businessman with wonderful, innovative ideas. And he makes these ideas work. I mean, when he bought the carriages of the Orient Express and decided on this project, he was taking a great risk. And he takes risks that other people, other businessmen, would not get involved in. He also has wonderful taste, and he chooses properties. Of course, he goes and looks at everything himself.
Well, it certainly was as a commercial venture, and the basis for it was that in 1976 we had bought the Cipriani Hotel in Venice, and I was seeking ways to increase the patronage of that hotel. And so one idea was to start this train, and that would bring a lot of people to Venice to hopefully would stay at our hotel. I have no history of being involved in railways or up until that point, so I wouldn't call myself a railway buff, although over the years I've now become quite informed as to the restoration of railways and railway operations around the world. So in that sense, I probably am more of a buff today than I was at the beginning. The original project case indicated that it was going to cost about $5 million, and about a couple of years later, when we got into the project fully, that cost rose to $10 million and $15 million, and ultimately it cost a lot more than that. I think the final bill in sterling terms was £11 million, and the pound was worth a lot more then than it is today. So it really went over the top. We hadn't realized the extent of work which would have to be done on these two trains to bring them back into service.
I really, at the beginning, thought it was a very strange and bizarre thing to do. And then, of course, as soon as I got involved with looking at the history of the carriages and the history of the routings, I became fascinated. And so I'm a great aficionado now, but in the beginning I was really rather amazed at the popular sort of thrill that people had when you talked about it. And anyway, it's been a big part of my life for the last 12 years.
The Orient Express, the world's grandest train, has a story going back more than a century. It begins with Georges Nagelmakers, son of a rich banker from Liège, whose clients included King Leopold III of Belgium. During a stay in America, the young Nagelmakers was impressed by the luxurious railway carriages operated by one George Mortimer Pullman. There were dining, sleeping, and day parlor cars, so that long journeys across the United States could be made in great comfort. Nagelmakers returned home fired with the idea of starting a Pullman-style service in Europe, where there was a crying need for better long-distance travel. Using the finances and connections of his family bank and his royal client, who was also a railway enthusiast, he formed in 1876 the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons-Lits, with contracts on railway systems across Europe. Meanwhile, George Mortimer Pullman's company, thus preempted on the continent, turned its attentions towards Britain. The greatest need was to forge a link from prosperous northwest Europe right across to the approaches to the Middle East. On the 4th of October 1883, Nagelmakers inaugurated the Orient Express from Paris through Munich, Vienna, Budapest, and Bucharest to Gheorghe on the River Danube, the frontier between Romania and Bulgaria. Here, passengers had to cross the river by ferry, then proceed on a rather less luxurious train to Varna on the Black Sea coast. Lastly came an overnight voyage of 170 miles to Constantinople, now Istanbul. The whole journey took some 4 days. In 1889, a through rail route to Constantinople was opened via Belgrade and Sofia, cutting out the Danube ferry and the Black Sea crossing. The next milestone came in 1906 with the opening of the Simplon tunnel under the Alps. This brought a new service from Paris through Lausanne and the tunnel to Milan and Venice, the Simplon Orient-Express. After the Great War, the Orient-Express developed into a whole network of trains linking West and East Europe, all using the Wagon-Lee Company's luxurious cars. One service ran through to Greece. Another, avoiding German territory in the aftermath of war, ran to Budapest via Zurich, the Arlberg Pass, and Vienna, the Arlberg Orient-Express. And there was now a regular service from England. Travellers called the 11 o'clock boat train from London's Victoria Station, which in 1929 became an all-Pullman train named the Golden Arrow. From Dover, the specially built steamer Canterbury made the crossing to Calais, where the French boat train the Flèche d'Or would be waiting, with Orient-Express coaches attached. In those heady days between the wars, the Orient-Express was the way to travel for the great and good, and the great and bad, spies, diplomats, courtesans, arms dealers, royalty, including King Boris III of Bulgaria, a railway enthusiast who enjoyed nothing better than driving the locomotive. Steam, of course. And there were other excitements. Getting marooned in snowdrifts, attacks by terrorists. But of course, real success rested on a steady flow of everyday passengers, businessmen, tourists, all the length of the line between Paris and Istanbul. But then came the Second World War. And in the years following, the fortunes of the Orient-Express began to decline. The Iron Curtain killed much of the travel to and from Eastern Europe, while the rise of the airlines robbed the train of its best business. Services were cut back. Ordinary carriages replaced many of the sumptuous Wagon-Lee cars. And finally, on the 19th of May, 1977, the Orient-Express made its last run from Paris. 4 run-down coaches tacked onto a succession of ordinary trains. It arrived in Istanbul 5 hours late.
It was, in fact, the publicity which surrounded the stopping of the old train in 1977 which grasped my interest, because there was so much of it. Every newspaper and magazine around the world was talking about the old Orient-Express, that I thought that there was this great interest on the part of the traveling public in this train, and perhaps it could be brought back and made profitable.
A number of withdrawn Wagon-Lee cars were still to be found in various corners of Europe, and in October 1977, Sotheby's held an historic auction sale in Monte Carlo.
I did go with the intention of buying some carriages if I could acquire them at the right price. And these were the the 5 carriages which were used in the film Murder on the Orient-Express, which had come out a couple of years earlier. And obviously I had seen them in that film, so I knew approximately what they were like before I arrived in Monte Carlo that day.
In James Sherwood's planning, a crucial early decision was to restore the English portion of the luxury journey, which used to be run by the Golden Arrow. That meant searching for restorable Pullman cars in Britain as well as on the continent.
We consulted with the Railways Museum in Britain and York, who led us to a number of small museums and individual owners of the British Pullman cars. And in the case of the museums, they didn't really have the funds to restore the cars, and they said, well, look, why don't you take them and restore them and operate them, because from our point of view, that's better than just leaving them here idle and unrepaired, because we would never have the resources to spend on them to bring them up to their former standard.
One of the private individuals who had saved a Pullman from the scrap heap was David Lowther, a master at Eton College.
Now, I became interested in Pullman carriages way back in the steam era of the 50s and kept a record of various diagrams and workings, so I knew the location, the condition, and the service life of all the British Pullmans. And when it came to 1972 and the Brighton Bell was to be withdrawn, here was a chance to buy a surviving traditional Pullman, unaltered, one in good condition and straight out of service. Now, within the Brighton Bell sets, which had been built in 1932 and reflected all the Art Deco fashion of that period, Audrey stood out. Unlike most Pullmans, which had a motif in the marquetry panels which was repeated throughout the carriage, Audrey had 12 different pastoral scenes, so that made it rather special. But if you add to that 20 armchairs and a clubroom atmosphere, then Audrey really was a gem. And then in 1977, the railway-minded employees of Sea Containers then got in contact with me to try and locate the surviving British Pullmans. And then in 1979, my car was moved up to Carnforth. Now, by that stage, the team of skilled men from all around that area had been assembled to restore the train, and they were all working on the engineering side of it. The cars were all been assembled at Carnforth. Audrey looked terrific, and I had done virtually all I could in terms of my own restoration inside and the external restoration. Cosmetically, it was in a very good museum piece state. So in the autumn of 1980, Audrey passed on to the VSOE people and became part of the train.
The workshops at Carnforth achieved superb standards of workmanship on the rescued Pullmans. Though restoring the marquetry panels inside, a highly specialised skill, went to the family firm of Duns of Chelmsford, which had actually made many of the originals half a century before, for both the Pullmans and the Continental Wagonlit cars. By 1982, a complete set of Pullman cars was ready. And on the 25th of May that year, just 5 years after the old train's last run, James Sherwood was at Victoria Station to launch the reborn Orient-Express. For its service depot, the company took a lease on the old works at Long Hedge in Battersea, where Pullman cars were built and rebuilt until 1928. The man in charge at Long Hedge today is Tim Robbins.
My job is Engineering Administration Manager, and basically I'm responsible for restoring the Pullman cars and keeping them running and fully up to operational and safety requirements in the running fleet.
Tim Robbins has a fleet of 10 operational vintage Pullmans in his care, none less than 40 years old, most considerably more. He has a special affection for the car named Ibis.
Our Ibis is a bit of a celebrity on the Orient Express because she has two claims to fame. She's the oldest car in our entire fleet, and she's the only one that's actually served on both sides of the Channel. When she was brand new in 1925, she was sold to the Wagon Lee Company and operated for 4 years in Italy, running between Rome and Naples. In 1929, she was repatriated, so to speak, and spent her life on the southern region, running on boat trains to Southampton docks and the Bournemouth Bell, the Golden Arrow, and other named trains on the southern region. So she's the grand old lady of the train.
Several of the other cars are only slightly younger. Minerva was built in 1927 and worked to the West Country in the famous Devon Bell. Zena, built in 1928, ran to the industrial north in the Yorkshire and Tees Tyne Pullmans. The interiors of the carriages are masterpieces of design. Car Lucille features a sporting lady on her lavatory floor. Cygnus and Perseus are the youngsters. They were part of a new set of coaches built for the Golden Arrow in Festival of Britain year 1951. And then there are Vera and Audrey, the Brighton Bell cars of 1932 vintage. These posed special engineering problems as they were built not for loco haulage, but as parts of 5-coach electric units permanently coupled.
We have 2 cars from the Brighton Bell already running in the set. They do require a lot of work to convert them, but once done, they are amongst the most beautiful cars in our collection. They have a very strong Art Deco theme in the decoration, and they really are superb to look at. We, at the moment, only use the trailer cars from the Brighton Bell. The Brighton Bell had something called a motor car at each end. We have 3 of those cars, but we haven't yet attempted to use them under modern circumstances. We do use the trailers, which we've modified fairly extensively in order to be hauled by a diesel locomotive and indeed occasionally by a steam one. We have 9 vehicles in the Ghost fleet, some from the Brighton Bell, some from the Queen of Scots, and 1 indeed from the Golden Arrow. And we hope one day very much to get all of those back in traffic where they belong. I think we have to say that the kitchens on the Pullman cars have been our greatest challenge, because whereas the public areas of the cars must be as authentic as is humanly possible, the kitchens cannot be. The kitchens have to be done to modern environmental health standards, and that involves widespread use of stainless steel, plastics and other materials which simply weren't available in the heyday of the Pullman car company. The Pullmans really divide into 2 horizontally. The running gear, the wheels and the bogies and the couplings, are very much the same sort of thing as you get on the older type of car running on British Rail today. So the routine of looking after those is very much the same as on some of the trains running on British Rail. The big difference comes in the bodies of the cars and in the type of decor which you find in them. The marquetry and the cabinet work requires constant attention. A number of our workshop staff come from down on the Sussex coast, our French polishers come from Lancashire, and our painter and signwriter comes from Shropshire. And all these gentlemen are gentlemen approaching retirement, and unfortunately in all of these craft skills there are just not the young people coming along to replace them. When we first started, the whole objective was the Venice service, which was very much a seasonal operation from spring to October, and 3 times a week. And there wasn't much thought of doing anything else with the Pullman carriages but that through service. since then we have gradually expanded into a whole range of day excursions and also charters, whereby companies or parties, groups can hire the whole train to go wheresoever they wish. And in fact, the day excursions and the charters now account for about 2/3 of our operation. The train now does something of the order of 50,000 miles a year, which, although it's not a great amount by modern standards, is a lot of miles for a lot of elderly ladies, which is how we like to think of our Pullman cars.
The elderly ladies of the Orient Express are now in the business of entertaining younger ladies of today.
It's my birthday today, and I didn't know anything about it until about 7:30 this morning, when I opened my birthday cards, and there was an extra little packet with my presents, and I opened up the very attractive box, all done up with ribbon, and when I opened the box, there were the tickets for this trip today. It put me into a flat spin, 7:30 in the morning, panic. What do I wear? Flying around like a mad thing, trying to decide what I was going to wear. It's a lovely surprise. Relaxing, lovely atmosphere, courteous staff, lovely lunch. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely super, memorable.
The rescue of the Orient Express in mainland Europe was rather different. Whilst the surviving British Pullmans had become scattered among various different owners, on the continent there had been that high-profile sale of 5 cars in Monte Carlo. And there were others. James Sherwood takes up the story.
On the continent, it was a bit easier in the sense that we just went to the Wagon-Lee company, which of course started the Orient Express train and indeed owned all of the classic Orient Express cars. And we asked them, where they had cars available, and they told us that they had moved most of the beautiful between the wars cars to Spain and Portugal, and that they were close to being retired from service. So we went to Spain and Portugal and looked at the cars and were able to purchase them from the Wagon-Lee company.
Spanish and Portuguese railways use a wide 5'6" gauge, so these cars had to be refitted with the standard gauge bogies they'd used in their heyday when they travelled the length of Europe: Rome, Istanbul, Venice, Amsterdam, Nice. Like the British Pullmans, the Wagon-Lee cars mostly date from the late 1920s. Several of them were built in Birmingham, for England was then still the railway workshop of the world. A few cars are slightly younger, such as the 2 service cars, Belgian-built as tourist sleepers in 1949. Rebuilding the cars was undertaken at workshops in Ostend and Bremen, which had repaired Wagon-Lee cars before, though not to the standards demanded by James Sherwood's Orient Express.
One of the major cost factors in renovating them was the need to make them acceptable for running at 140 kilometers an hour here in the United Kingdom, or at 160 kilometers per hour on the continent. And that brings with it, for these carriages built in the 1920s, 70 odd years ago, some technical problems. For example, we had to replace all of the windows with shatterproof glass. We had to strengthen the bodies, the steel bodies, so that in case of an accident, that the carriages wouldn't collapse or accordion. We had the wooden panels, these marquetry panels. They are treated with 7 coats of fire retardant material. So that in event of a fire breaking out, that the fire would not spread.
Unlike the British Pullman, which is entirely a day train, the Continental rig has a 28-hour journey and needs both day and night accommodation. So the two ends of the train consist of sleeping cars, with cabins convertible for day use, while marshalled in the middle come the day cars, restaurants and bar saloon, plus the 2 service cars for staff and baggage. The day cars can always be picked out by their light-coloured upper panels. The next step was to finalise the route the restored train would follow. The fixed points were London at one end, Paris, historic headquarters of the Orient Express, in the centre, and at the other end, Venice and the Cipriani Hotel, owned by James Sherwood. Venice, of course, is one of the world's top tourist venues and had been served by the Orient Express on and off since 1906, the year the Simplon Tunnel opened under the Alps. So they decided to christen the reborn train the Venice-Simplon Orient-Express and to run 3 return trips a week on the traditional route via Paris, Lausanne, La Simplon Tunnel, Milan and Verona. However, this plan had some serious snags. The worst was that to fit in 3 trips a week while keeping departure times from London and Venice at a civilized hour, the train had to travel through the best alpine scenery at night. Secondly, the long run across the North Italian plain proved uncomfortably hot in summer. And of course, 1920s rolling stock is not air-conditioned. So from 1985, James Sherwood decided to run the train just twice a week, following a longer, slower, but much more interesting route through Zurich, the Arlberg Tunnel, Innsbruck and over the Brenner Pass into Italy, with the train crossing the Alps in daylight. The Arlberg line had been used by the old Orient Express to Vienna in the 1920s, but the section over the Brenner Pass from Innsbruck to Verona was completely new ground. The change proved so successful that the train now carries more people on its 2 trips per week than it used to do with 3. This thrilling journey across the Alps does place some restrictions on the train. VSOE Chief Executive Nick Varian explains.
Well, ultimately what we're governed by is the size of train that we can run, both in weight terms and platform length terms, through Europe. The train that we have in Europe at the moment, which is 17 carriages long, is the longest train that, is allowed to operate through passenger facilities in Europe. So there's no prospect of us increasing the train. But, our train is exceptionally heavy. The vintage carriages were built to a very, very sturdy standard. So we certainly have to use double and sometimes even treble traction through some of the steeper passes. We rely on traction. Our locomotives are provided by the various railway companies of Europe, and trying to get the drivers to understand the differences between our antique carriages and a modern Austrian train. It was certainly a challenge in the beginning, and I think on one journey when we put the brakes on a bit, or they put the brakes on a bit too hard coming down from the Alps, I think we flattened virtually every wheel on our train and lost a lot of crockery in the process.
The journey to Venice from the English Channel via the Arlberg route is almost exactly 1,000 miles. And in that time, the train passes through 4 countries: France, Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. At each frontier, a new locomotive from the next country takes over. There are other loco changes too, at places where, because of railway geography, the train has to reverse, such as here at Innsbruck. As the train threads the scenery and history of Europe, on board it's hospitality on the grand scale. Nick Varian is justly proud of the standards on today's Orient-Express.
I would like to say we pay attention to all aspects of the journey. Obviously, people are expecting something very special. We used to use as our slogan, this was a trip of a lifetime. I mean, it's interesting that we actually get a number of people who come back year after year, so they're obviously collecting for future lifetimes. We pay a lot of attention to the service that we provide on board, the food that we provide on board, because we see it as a kind of investment in memories. You know, if people come on our train, it's not something that they should just go back and say, well, I've done that. It should be something that lives with them for, you know, some time to come. A lot of booze is drunk on the Orient Express, I have to say. It's the celebratory mood, I guess. We again select, you know, really the finest of French wines and Italian wines, and every year we hold a sort of blind tasting to taste the latest production, and our selection is then made by our staff in Europe from those tastings.
The 3 dining cars in the train all have different characters and ambience. Train manager Philippe Beauchecoil knows them well.
Well, this one that we are in at the moment is the marquetry. The 3 of them were built in the between 27 and 29. I think the last one was this one, 29, and the 2 other were 27 and 28. This one. It's actually very good, and people really enjoy at lunchtime. The next one, which is the Lalique and the Pullman Côte d'Azur, it's called, have a special feeling, especially around dinner time, because of the sculpture of Lalique. And I think the comfort, the chair are different, and the people, I think it's closer. You really feel that you are on a table of 2, just you and nobody else, and it's really romantic. And the third one is it's between both of them. We try to always ask people to dine or to have lunch or to have brunch in different dining cars, so they can actually find a different decoration, and they can't really be bored at the end of the trip eating in the same dining car, and I think it's a very good idea.
Any restaurant is only as good as the people who work in it. Here, the Orient Express has the best of all worlds. Nick Varian again.
We employ a number of different nationalities. I mean, of course, our passengers come from all over the world, so we have to make sure that, we're fluent in all the major languages of the world. But it's very interesting. I mean, having initially recruited a mixture of Italians, English, French, and various other European nationalities, without any design from us, it's kind of people have focused into the areas that they're best at. So, for instance, our French staff, for the most part, seem to work in our kitchens. Our Italian staff seem for the most part to work in the bars and the restaurants. And our English staff excel as the stewards on board the train. And it's interesting the way that's sort of divided itself up. Most of them, I think, came out of the hospitality business, the hotel business, because, we are really a grand hotel on wheels. But interestingly, having joined us, we get very little turnover. The staff become so involved and loyal to the train, this great beast that they're working on, that they stay with us and really they become part of the fixtures. Well, as you can imagine, cooking for up to 180 people on a train is not an easy experience, and we do everything ourselves. We're not buying in pre-prepared airline meals or anything like that. One of the conditions, I think, of employment in our kitchens is you've got to be ectomorphic. You've got to be incredibly thin, because as you can imagine, the space for chefs to pass each other in the tiny little galleys, is very tight. I'm continually amazed by the quality of food that, they manage to produce out of such apparently limited space and facilities. We're very much in the grand traditions of French cuisine. That means that all of our ingredients, or most of our ingredients, are fresh. They're selected from the markets. They're selected from the stations where our suppliers will come down and proffer their wares. Of course, we're offering 2 dinners for somebody doing the full journey, so we have to make sure there's enough variety, enough selection that's going to appeal to all tastes.
Ever since the earliest days, the chief victualling point for the Orient Express has been Paris. Today, just as 100 years ago, market men offer the finest French delicacies to tickle the travelling gourmet's palate. Head chef Christian Bodigel checks everything.
C'est la 39 douce. Canard, c'est bon. Ici, viande d'assiette, je l'ai mis là-bas. Tout ça, c'est la viande qui va ici. For the lunch. Beautiful. This with for tomorrow for the lunch. It's okay. We use with.
Everything must be stacked in exactly the right place. When service starts, there's no time for rootling around trying to find things. Wherever the train stops, the men of the kitchen brigade are liable to find themselves celebrities. High up the valley of the River Inn, artificial tunnels protect the railway from avalanches. As the westbound train heads towards the Arlberg Pass, it's time for the stewards to change the cabins from daytime to nighttime layout. As with everything on the Orient Express, there's a place and a reason for everything. Steward Mario makes it all look so simple. The linen may be new, fine quality and freshly laundered, but this sleeping car has carried the ladies and gentlemen of Europe on their luxurious travels for 60 years and more. The social scene centers on the bar lounge, as sophisticated as in any grand hotel. The difference is that this one was built in 1931 as a dining car for the Paris-Cherbourg boat trains. It's now furnished and decorated in Art Nouveau style by top French designer Gérard Gallet. Cocktails, of course, are an essential part of the scene. Every guest agrees that the grand piano in the bar just makes the atmosphere. Nick Varian has to view it from a more practical angle.
I think the interesting thing about the piano is that if you look at the size of a baby grand piano and you look at the size of the doors on the train, you realise that it is quite impossible for one to pass through the other. And the story is actually that to get the piano into the bar car on the train, we had to cut a whole section out of the side of the train. I'm a bit worried about what happens when we need to replace the piano, but it's been soldiering on pretty well so far. We bought a good one in the first place.
Troy, just before dawn, and the croissants come aboard with the morning papers. The staff, uniformed for the day, fill the boxes to be taken to each sleeping car. There's a fresh brioche and croissant for each passenger.
Thanks very much, man.
After breakfast, there's time to catch up on the world's news. Though on the Orient Express, the world outside can seem rather distant and unreal. Soon, a great sprawl of yards and depots heralds the approach to Paris. Here at Gare de l'Est, the Orient Express takes on stores and changes engines. Here too, a number of passengers from Italy and Austria leave the train, while others join for the onward journey to London. And now, with Paris behind and new passengers on board, it's time for mid-morning brunch, a delicious light meal of scrambled egg and smoked salmon, broiled lobster with fresh cress butter, and caramelized apple tartlet. A crisp white wine does wonders for appetites jaded from the night before. And now too, it's a good moment to visit the boutique, cunningly built into one end of the Lalique dining car. Here are charming gifts and mementos, all designed for the Orient Express and themed on its history and artifacts. Like so many things on board, the boutique has a second purpose. It's fitted with a hidden fridge and basin, so that it can be used to serve drinks should the bar car be out of the train. As the fields and villages of northern France spin by, thoughts may turn to how train travel has changed since Georges Nagelmackers began the Orient Express back in 1883. Somewhere over there is France's superb high-speed line, where Eurostar trains reach 180 miles an hour on their way to the Channel Tunnel. But the Orient Express travels at a much more human speed of 70 miles an hour or so, as it's done since the wagon-lit cars were new back in the 1920s. And now, we're reaching Boulogne. This replaced Calais as the port for the Orient Express when the new train began under James Sherwood's regime. The crossing to Folkestone is made on the twin-hulled Sea Cat, which does the journey in under 1 hour. Very soon, the white cliffs of England show up ahead. Afternoon tea in the English Pullmans is the perfect finale to the long trek from Venice, which started mid-morning the day before. The Pullmans are slightly smaller than the continental cars, and the atmosphere has a drawing room elegance that is yet intimate and friendly.
Have you enjoyed your trip?
Yes, I have very much.
So, memorable points about the trip?
There's sometimes a railway buff on the trip, noting the running of the train on the 70-mile journey from Folkestone to London Victoria. Some people are still celebrating. But by now, most people have had so much good food and drink that leaving the train is going to be a real effort. But all good things must come to an end. And soon, Victoria Station will be the terminus for another journey on the Orient Express. The Orient Express today is spoken of in the same breath as Concorde and the QE2. It's the ultimate in luxury travel, yet with all the nostalgia of a former age that is absolutely real and authentic. This train really was built in the 1920s, though the carriages on both sides of the channel are probably better today than they've ever been.
it's the real thing. I mean, when George Nagelmacher started the concept in 1883, and you know, when you look at the history of Mortimer Pullman or whatever, they really set the standards. And I think what we're trying to do in this modern day is continue the traditions that they set. So people sometimes ask us, why didn't we go and put sort of modern bathrooms on the Orient Express? Isn't it a bit inconvenient? I think our point is no, this is the real train, these are the real carriages from the 1930s, and we would mess with them at our peril. And train travel, of course, you know, has a great nostalgic pull for people all over the world, and it's amazing, you know, as I travel around the world, and you know, we get people from literally every country travelling on the train. It's amazing how the nostalgia of train travel really permeates, you know, the world. It's very uplifting. It's almost a spiritual experience. You know, eating a meal with fine wines, going through the most beautiful scenery in the world is a very mind-enhancing experience. You know, too much nowadays, you travel quickly just to get to a place, whereas I think what we're saying is no, you should enjoy the gentle changes of scenery, so that when you arrive, you've kind of become acclimatized rather than the sort of sudden culture shock that you get with modern jet travel.
So what of the future? In Britain, there's steam. The crowds as steam train draws have always been a serious potential hazard on the electrified tracks of southern England. But the first excursions with the British Pullman set have now run safely and successfully, and negotiations are well in hand for steam to haul it regularly on the Folkestone Run, a sight not seen since the Golden Arrow was electrified back in 1961. A new departure is that on certain dates in the year, the train from Venice splits at Basel. While one portion goes on to Paris and Boulogne, the other travels up the famous line through the Rhine Gorge and onto Düsseldorf. This taps an important new market in Germany. And the Continental train also now makes occasional longer trips to Vienna and Prague. So could the train ever run through to Eastern Europe once more, as it did in the old days? James Sherwood is doubtful.
I think it's unlikely that we would extend the train service to Istanbul as it was originally, just because of lack of demand beyond Venice. The conditions in Eastern Europe are not particularly good, and of course with the troubles in Yugoslavia, it makes it rather difficult for the train to go from Venice to Belgrade and on to Eastern Europe. I mean, Venice is a great attraction for the train, and as I mentioned earlier, we of course are seeking to bring the maximum number of people to Venice in the hopes that many of the train passengers will stay at the Hotel Cipriani. I think that the project has been an enormous success. We have the same staff has been with both trains now for many years. I mean, I think it's they love their work, and we have very little turnover on that side. In any event, it does pay its way. It is profitable, and I feel that it will continue indefinitely, because I see no reason why these carriages, which are, let's say, 70 years old on average, should not last for another 70 years, as long as they're well maintained.